A young man named Horace was banished to the desert with the harsh words that if he loved playing with sand so much, he could play there forever. This forced relocation from the castle of White Desert made him feel like his life was over. The story flashes back 3 years to the Magref Empire, where Prince Horace was celebrating his 12th birthday. Guests congratulated him, while mates nearby gossiped excitedly about what his magical affinity might be, as it was the age he would find out. They hoped it would be a grand element like water, wind, or perhaps fire, especially since among the 5 siblings, Prince Horace possessed the highest magical power. Horace himself appeared thoughtful as he awaited the revelation. As the moment arrived for his affinity to be determined, the maids were cautioned not to say anything untoward on such a celebratory occasion. Horace focused, and a magical apparatus began to indicate his power. His affinity was revealed to be sand. The reaction from the onlookers was one of stunned silence and then dismay, which shocked Horace. He found himself surrounded by judgmental whispers, with people noting that sand was a single, presumably weak element, meaning he couldn't use other types of magic. They also derisively commented that even with high magical power, a concubine's child remains just that. The whispers continued, calling him useless. His own father then coldly told Horace not to come near him, labeling him an inferior race and a disgrace to the royal family. For Horace, his life as the 5th prince of the Magref Empire essentially ended on that day. Returning to the present, Horace stood alone in the vast desert, reflecting on his exile and the painful labels. A disgrace to the family, a concubine's child, and possessing only a single sand affinity. He wondered if his fate would have been different if his affinity wasn't sand, even as he acknowledged that sand magic itself could be amazing. Suddenly, his resolve hardened. He found a burnt message, likely from his 3rd brother who had a fire affinity and was apparently quite arrogant. Horace, the 5th child, decided that even if he gave up, nothing would change. He declared he would live right there in the desert, realizing it was the perfect place for his sand magic. His immediate priority became finding water. Using a skill called sand sense, Horace quickly detected a water reaction beneath the desert surface. He then cast sand ripple, and a significant amount of water surged forth. He laughed, understanding that while his exilers intended the desert to be a punishment, for him, it was the best possible place. Declaring this, he used sand swirl, which gathered the water into a large, accessible pool. With water secured, Horace decided he needed a place to live. He employed his sand magic to conjure a magnificent sand castle, which rose impressively from the desert floor. He was pleased with its grand exterior, deeming it not bad and looking good. However, upon entering, he found the interior too plain. Believing that a castle needs beautiful decorations, he decided to modify his sand castle spell to embellish the inside. He envisioned creating a lobby, guest rooms, a kitchen, and a throne room, though he mused the latter might be unnecessary. He also planned a private room and a study for himself. Feeling that being alone would be lonely, he decided to make a sand golem to protect him, marking the true beginning of his new life in the desert, and he counted on his future golem. After some time and effort, Horace felt tired. He then considered his other needs: food, plants near his water source, glass for windows, and perhaps some fur. He used his sand sense again, this time to look for anything useful in the vicinity. His senses soon picked up something alarming. Someone had collapsed nearby, and they were surrounded by multiple other presences, which he felt could be a bad situation. Realizing the urgency, Horace hurried towards the location. He soon saw a person slumped over on a camel, surrounded by small, aggressive goblin-like creatures. These creatures were attacking both the person and the camel, with the person clearly struggling. Horace immediately intervened, launching a sand spear attack that struck some of the creatures, surprising them, the distressed camel, and the barely conscious rider. He was glad he had made it just in time. The remaining creatures turned their attention to him, but Horace, recognizing them as a mere distraction, prepared more sand magic. He unleashed a sandstorm, followed by a sand ring, which effectively dealt with the attackers. With the threat neutralized, Horace approached the collapsed individual and their camel, asking if they were okay and excusing himself as he gently checked on the person. He discovered the rider was a beautiful young woman, unconscious. Telling himself it wasn't the time to stare, he decided to help her and carefully lifted her to move her to safety, while the camel seemed to watch with understanding. He brought her back to his newly created sandcastle, reassuring the anxious camel that his magic was harmless. He gently laid the woman on a bed he had made, observing that she wouldn't recover easily at this rate and would need something nutritious and easy to eat. He asked the camel to wait patiently. To find sustenance for her, Horace once again used his sand sense. At first, he didn't detect anything suitable nearby, thinking it might be too far. But then, his senses picked up a biological reaction. In fact, many of them. Investigating further, he found 2 different types of ants engaged in a fierce battle. Horace used a spell called Sand Spring to intervene, and his magic seemingly separated the warring ant factions. One group of ants, perhaps the ones he had inadvertently helped, approached him. He wondered aloud if there was a conflict among the desert ants and rather awkwardly accepted their presence. To his surprise, one of the ants offered him a small, translucent sack containing a viscous liquid. He recognized it as ant honey, noting its sweet smell. Gratefully, he thanked the ants and took the honey back to his castle. Back with the unconscious woman, Horace carefully fed her the ant honey, little by little, determined to save her. Sometime later, after resting himself, he was by her side when she finally awoke. She let out a surprised, "Wah!" upon seeing him and then, looking at her beautiful surroundings, asked if he was okay. Overwhelmed, she thanked him profusely for saving her life, expressing a wish to repay him somehow. She then hesitated, looking somewhat abashed, before admitting she knew she might be asking too much, but she had a request. With hopeful eyes, she asked Horace if she could stay there with him in the sand castle. Horace was visibly surprised by her question, and the chapter concluded with the prospect of their life together in the desert beginning that a young woman named Isis, accompanied by her camel Raku, tearfully asked a young man named Horace if she could stay with him, offering to do anything in return. Horace, surprised by her desperation, kindly requested to hear her story first, standing before the impressive sand castle he had built. Inside the castle, Isis thanked Horace for saving her and Raku when they collapsed in the desert. She explained that she had been driven out of her country but couldn't share the details. Horace revealed that he too had been exiled, and his sand attribute magic, which allowed him to manipulate sand, proved useful for survival in the desert, enabling him to construct his current abode. Isis was intrigued by his rare sand magic, looking around at the intricately crafted sand hallways and pillars, and asked if he had built it all himself. Horace confirmed this, and Isis then questioned if his useless, sand-only magic was the reason for his exile. Horace's slight irritation confirmed her suspicion. Suddenly filled with indignation, Isis declared it was cruel to exile someone for such a reason, especially when Horace had created an amazing castle and saved her, a stranger. Grabbing his hand, she passionately proposed that they build the greatest kingdom together. Horace, momentarily taken aback, agreed, together, but then quickly became flustered, trying to clarify that he didn't mean it in a romantic way, but rather as a way to repay her kindness and because neither of them had anywhere else to go. Isis, touched by his initial sincerity, was moved to tears. Horace gently took her hand again, suggesting they help each other since they were both displaced. With a newfound purpose, Horace decided they should act immediately and, using his sand wave magic, swiftly transported himself, Isis, and Raku across the desert. Isis was initially startled by the rapid, rippling sand travel but soon found herself at an oasis Horace had located using his sound-based sand detection magic. He explained they could gather plants there and then proceeded to hunt, bringing back meat, furs, cacti, and nuts. Back at his sand castle, Horace demonstrated how his magic could also be used for food preservation and storage. However, the area around the castle still felt barren despite the cacti Horace had planted. Isis then revealed her own ability, life magic, and used growth acceleration to instantly grow the small plants into lush, tall palm trees, transforming the area into a complete oasis. Impressed, Horace high-fived her. Feeling sweaty from their endeavors, Isis asked if she could take a quick bath in the new oasis, and Horace, understanding, agreed to wait. While Isis bathed, enjoying the cool water, she contemplated how to repay Horace for saving her life, even wondering what might make a boy happy. Meanwhile, Horace tried to keep his thoughts pure, but his resolve was broken when Isis suddenly screamed. He rushed to her side to find her startled by the appearance of large honey ants. Isis, quickly covering herself, explained that the ants seemed panicked and had interrupted her bath. The ants made ari-ari sounds, and Isis guessed they wanted her and Horace to follow them. Considering their new life in the desert, Horace agreed it might be best to investigate. The ant led them to a massive earthen structure, an ant nest that Horace described as a castle made of earth. Inside, they found a surprisingly spacious network of rooms and tunnels, far larger than Horace's sand detection had revealed. As they ventured deeper, they noticed an injured ant. They were eventually guided into a grand hall where a humanoid ant figure, seated on a throne, thanked them for coming. This figure introduced herself as the queen of the honey ants and the overseer of the nest. Horus and Isis introduced themselves in return, with Horus inwardly marveling at a talking ant and the diverse creatures of the desert. High in the vast, endless desert, Lord Horus agreed to cooperate with the ants, understanding that mutual help was essential for survival in such an environment. The ant representative, who would later be known as Mel, expressed her gratitude that Horus had accepted their request to assist them. Mel explained that she needed Horus to escort her, as he was to meet directly with the king of the iron ants to resolve a dire situation. Her people, the honey ants, were not strong in combat and faced eventual annihilation by the iron ants. Thus, she earnestly requested Horus to lend them the formidable power he had previously demonstrated in repelling their foes. Horus considered this, recognizing that the honey ants needed to improve their fighting strength while he himself required information about the desert's surroundings. He proposed a transactional relationship. He would provide his magic, combat prowess, and enhancements, and in return, the honey ants would supply him with honey. Mel found this to be a most welcome proposal, and Horus suggested they depart immediately. As they journeyed, Isis, Horus's companion, marveled at his sand magic, noting its incredible versatility for both combat and swift travel, finding it almost beyond imagination that a single sand attribute could be so potent. Mel, too, was deeply impressed, contemplating the benefits of an alliance with someone as powerful as Horus, who in turn acknowledged that the assistance was mutual. Their journey led them to a structure resembling a massive mountain, which was the iron ant's nest. The sheer oppressive presence emanating from it was enough to make one feel faint, a fact Horus silently acknowledged. Confronted by aggressive iron ants, Horus unleashed a great sand wave, followed by sand bind, to immobilize their attackers, deeming this sufficient to neutralize the immediate threat. Venturing inside the nest, Horus examined the walls, finding them wide and sturdy. Isis wondered about the material, and Horus identified it as iron sand. Mel explained that the iron ants constructed their dwellings in land naturally rich in this material. Horus mused that since it was still a form of sand, he might be able to control it, hoping to assist the Iron Ant King and perhaps obtain some of the iron sand for himself. To Isis's amazement, Horus successfully manipulated the iron sand of the nest's walls, making them seem almost alive. He was pleased with this newfound control, realizing he could now restrain the ants without concern for the remaining sand in their structure. They proceeded deeper into a wide passage, and Isis expressed her surprise that Mel, the queen of the honey ants, had come so far herself, even bringing attendants. Soon, they stood before the imposing Iron Ant King. Horus stated his intention was to talk, but the king curtly dismissed any notion of discussion, much to Mel's dismay, who believed there should be room for negotiation. The king, however, was consumed by a murderous rage, repeatedly uttering threats and exuding an aura of death. As the king lunged to attack, Horus quickly reacted, shouting for him to stay still and ensnaring him with iron sand binding. Using his sand sense, Horus perceived that the king's aggression was unnatural. There was another life force, a parasitic demon, residing within the king's head. Isis inquired if her life magic could be of assistance. Horus confirmed the presence of the parasite and stated he was preparing to carefully extract it to restore the king. He explained that removing the demon without harming the king or getting too close to the parasite required immense concentration and precise sand control. To achieve this, Horus summoned a sand golem to restrain the struggling king. The demon-influenced king, however, possessed great strength and shattered the golem. While Isis and Mel were taken aback, Horus calmly stated he would simply create another. He then formed a larger, more powerful golem, which successfully subdued the king, and Horus instructed it to maintain its hold. With great care, Horus began to extract the parasite from the king's head using his sand manipulation, addressing the entity, stating that while he bore it no ill will, he could not allow it to remain. Isis, concerned, asked about the king's condition. She soon confirmed that the king was safe. Though the procedure had been draining, she believed he would awaken shortly. Mel profusely thanked Lord Horus for his invaluable help, but Horus humbly replied that he had merely done what was necessary as a good neighbor and trading partner. When the Iron Ant King finally regained his senses, he was startled to see Horus and Isis, exclaiming, "Human," and accusing them of intending to destroy his home. Mel quickly intervened, explaining to her counterpart that Horus was the one who had saved him and that she would clarify the entire situation. The Iron Ant King, now lucid, expressed profound shame for his demonic state and sincerely thanked Lord Horus. He also apologized to Queen Mel for the trouble he had caused and offered to prepare apologies and gifts. Horus indicated that such offerings were unnecessary, but the king insisted on fulfilling his responsibilities. The Iron Ant King then invited them to his castle to discuss matters further. As they walked, Mel remarked to Isis about the beauty of the path to the oasis, based on tales from her aunts. Inside the castle, Isis was impressed by the Natsumayashi honey and the grandeur of the scale and decorations, attributing it to Horus's remarkable magic, while Mel admired the castle's shining appearance. Seated at a table, the king was about to make a proposal when Horus inquired about their names. Both the king and Mel revealed they did not have personal names, which Isis found somewhat unusual. Horus, too, found it a bit unfamiliar. After a moment of whispered consultation, the Iron Ant King and Honey Ant Queen together asked Horus if he would bestow names upon them. Feeling it was somewhat presumptuous but willing to oblige, Horus suggested the name Ein for the king and Mel for the queen, thinking the names suited them. The king proudly declared himself Ein and pledged to be Horus's treasure for life. The queen joyfully accepted her name, Mel. In that instant, both Ein and Mel underwent a startling transformation, shifting into humanoid forms. Ein became a tall, muscular man retaining ant-like features such as antennae and carapace-like armor, while Mel transformed into a curvaceous woman, also with distinct ant characteristics. Horus and Isis were utterly shocked by this sudden metamorphosis. Ein declared the transformation a success, and Mel, equally pleased, joined him in proclaiming that they now belonged to Horus. Amidst his surprise, Horus, noticing Mel's unclothed state, politely requested if they could, for the time being, put on some clothes.